I'm Claire Morgan, 30 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio. On Christmas night, in front of the tree and all our relatives, my father ordered me out of the house because I refused to hand my sister Rachel the $850,000 my grandfather left me. His voice thundered. Her laugh cut through me, and the silverware clattered as if the holiday itself had shattered. That night, I realized my family was willing to destroy me for money. If it were you, would you give in to keep the peace or fight back, even if it meant standing alone? Stay with me. Because once the truth came out, no one in my family walked away the same. That was how my Christmas ended. The door slamming behind me as I stepped into the freezing night. The cold air hit me like a wall, but I stood still on the porch for a moment. My breath rising in white clouds. My fingers shook as I clutched the railing. Behind the door, I could still hear the muffled voices. My father's booming tone. Rachel's sharp laugh. The clatter of silverware being gathered. Christmas dinner had dissolved into something else. Something ugly. For years, I had forced myself to believe these dinners mattered. I drove through icy roads. Baked pies. Wrapped gifts. All because part of me still longed to feel like I belonged at that table. And yet tonight had made the truth undeniable. My seat was only tolerated until I said no. I walked down the steps, snow crunching beneath my boots, and looked back once. Through the frosted window I could see the outline of the tree, its ornaments glimmering red and gold, the shadows of my relatives moving around. Not one of them had stood for me. The memory of my grandfather's voice came back, warm and steady. He had once told me, "Claire, people will try to take what you have built. Do not let them." That inheritance was more than money. It was his trust. The proof that at least one person in my family believed I was capable. Tonight, even that legacy had been turned into a weapon. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. For a second, I thought of ignoring it, but I pulled it out anyway. A text from Rachel lit up the screen. "You ruined Christmas. Dad was right to throw you out. If you cared about family, you'd sign tomorrow." I stared at the words until they blurred, my hands shaking from anger and cold. A laugh broke from my throat, sharp and bitter. Caring about family, to Rachel, meant handing her everything she wanted. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and started walking down the quiet street. Houses glowed with lights. Wreaths hung on every door. Children's laughter drifted faintly from somewhere. Columbus in December was beautiful, but I could not feel it. My chest was tight, as if a band had wrapped around it. Squeezing with every step, as I reached my car parked at the curb, I froze. A flashback hit me, sudden and raw. I was 16 again, standing in our old kitchen. Rachel had just broken Mum's favorite vase. My father stormed in, saw the pieces scattered on the floor, and his eyes immediately landed on me. "Claire, what have you done?" His voice had thundered then too. Rachel stood behind him, crocodile tears in her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry, Daddy. He didn't mean to." And somehow I had taken the blame, grounded for a month, while Rachel went to her school dance smiling. That memory bled into another college graduation. I had walked the stage, diploma in hand, proud and exhausted after years of working nights and studying. My parents clapped politely. But the moment Rachel announced she had landed a vague business opportunity, they were beaming, telling everyone how brilliant she was. No one asked about my job offers. I gripped the steering wheel of my car now, the metal icy beneath my fingers. Nothing had changed. It had always been Rachel's spotlight. My silence. The engine coughed to life, the heater sputtering as I sat there letting the windshield clear. I should have felt broken, but what I felt was sharper. A strange calm settled over me. For once, I had not given in. For once, I had stood up in front of them all and said no. I leaned back against the seat, watching the house one last time through the windshield. Inside, they would probably spin the story, tell each other that I had lost my mind, that I was selfish, that I had abandoned family. They would not say that they had chosen Rachel's lies over me. The tears came anyway, hot against the cold sting of my cheeks. I let them fall, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was grieving. Not just the words my father had thrown at me, but the years of trying to earn a place that was never meant for me. Finally, I shifted into drive. The car rolled forward, tires crunching over frozen snow. Street lamps stretched in a golden line ahead, guiding me away from the house, away from the weight of their judgment. As I turned the corner, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from my mother. Please, Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Rachel just wants to help. I almost laughed. Help. That word twisted in my gut. If this was help, then what did betrayal look like? I set the phone face down on the seat and kept driving. The city stretched out before me, quiet under the blanket of snow. My apartment was waiting. Small and simple, but it was mine. No one could slam the door in my face there. By the time I pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine, the silence felt heavy but also strangely steady. My hands were still trembling, but my decision was firm. They had drawn the line, not me. I sat in the car a moment longer, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My eyes were swollen, my face pale. But there was something else too, a spark I had not seen in years. Resolve. The night had stripped away the last illusions I held. They had made it clear I was on my own. And maybe that was exactly where I needed to be. I stepped out into the cold again, locked the car, and walked toward the dimly lit entrance of my building. The sound of laughter from a neighbor's apartment drifted down the hallway as I climbed the stairs. But it did not sting anymore. I had faced my family and walked away with my dignity intact. Inside my apartment, I switched on the lights. Warmth spread slowly as the heater kicked on. I shrugged off my coat and set my phone on the counter. The messages were still there, glowing, waiting to pull me back into the same cycle. I pressed the button until the screen went black. Silence wrapped around me, deep and complete. My chest still ached. But beneath it all, a steady thought grew stronger. Tonight was an ending, but it could also be a beginning. I sat on the edge of my couch with the lights dimmed, the hum of the heater filling the silence, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself think back. The images came sharp and unwelcome, as if my mind had been waiting for this night to push them back to the surface. I was 8 years old again. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cupcake, I had frosted myself. The candle flickered weakly, its flame bending from the draft of the open window. I remember waiting, listening for the sound of footsteps, the laughter of my parents, anything that meant they would come into the room and say, "Happy birthday." But no one came. Rachel's dance recital had run late, and everyone was too tired. My father had promised we would celebrate the next day, but that day never arrived. A week later, the living room was filled with balloons and wrapped gifts. Rachel had turned 6, and every cousin, every neighbor kid was there. I stood in the corner holding a paper plate of cake, watching her blow out 10 candles on a 2-tiered cake my mother had ordered. When she opened the first gift, a pink dollhouse taller than her, my father clapped so hard, his hands turned red. I remember the sting in my chest, the quiet thought that maybe I had been forgotten on purpose. Years blurred together after that, but the pattern never changed. Report cards pinned on the fridge. Rachel's mediocre grades praised like brilliance. My straight A's barely glanced at. I earned a scholarship to Ohio State, but it was Rachel's high school prom that filled the family photo albums. I leaned back into the couch, cushions, my eyes burning, and whispered into the empty room. I was never enough for them. The words tasted bitter. The memories shifted to when I was 22. Fresh out of college with a finance degree in hand, I had landed my first job at a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Columbus. I still remember the pride of putting on a new blazer, walking into that glass office building with its polished marble floors. The long hours and spreadsheets never scared me. I was hungry to prove myself. But when I called home, excited to share the news of my promotion to financial analyst, my mother's first question was about Rachel. Has your sister found a new place yet? She is so stressed. Your father and I worry about her. I told them Rachel had just quit another job, that she was fine. But the conversation ended with my father saying, "You should help her. Claire. She needs you." My accomplishment disappeared, erased in seconds. Now, at 30, I had climbed further than I thought possible. I worked as a senior financial analyst for a healthcare company, managing millions in budgets, guiding investments, keeping numbers in line when others could not. My boss relied on me. My coworkers respected me. I paid off my student loans, bought my own condo, and built savings that made me secure. Yet in my parents' eyes, it was still Rachel who shone brighter. No matter how many times she stumbled, I walked into my bedroom and opened the small cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were things I kept hidden. Old report cards, a faded photograph of me in a cap and gown, and tucked beneath it, a letter my grandfather had written shortly before he died. His shaky handwriting filled the page. "Claire, you have a mind for numbers and a heart for perseverance. I trust you to carry this family's legacy. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." I pressed the paper to my chest, tears spilling freely now. Grandpa Hayes had truly seen me. That was why he left me the inheritance. Not to cause division, but because he believed I would honor it, protect it. And tonight, in front of everyone, my father had thrown me out as if that trust meant nothing. I lay the letter back gently, closing the lid, and sat on the bed, staring at the dark window. Outside, snow fell steadily under the glow of the street lamp. My reflection looked back at me, tired and pale. But in my eyes, I saw the truth. I had been avoiding, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I achieved. My parents would never see me as the daughter worth keeping. I thought of the way my father's voice had thundered in the dining room, the look of satisfaction on Rachel's face as I was ordered out. The sting burned deeper, because part of me had always believed if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, they would finally recognize me. But tonight proved the opposite. I could have handed them the world and it still would not have been enough. The weight of that realization pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I curled my hands into fists, forcing myself to stand. Pacing the room to shake off the heaviness, I stopped at my dresser, catching sight of a framed photo from last summer's office party. I was laughing with coworkers, my arm around my friend Danielle. The contrast hit me hard. At work, I was respected, valued. At home, I was invisible, dispensable. I whispered again into the quiet. I am not their daughter. Not the way Rachel is. The words hung in the air like smoke. Painful but true. For the first time, I allowed myself to say it without fighting back with excuses. The heater clicked off, leaving a deeper silence that settled into my bones. I walked back into the living room, picked up my phone, and stared at the black screen. I thought of all the times I had run to them for approval, for love that never came. I set the phone down on the table and let out a long breath. In that moment, I understood something that made my stomach twist and my spine straighten at the same time. I had never been the daughter they wanted. And no matter what I did, I never would be. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the street in white. I pulled the curtains closed and turned off the last lamp. The apartment falling into darkness. My chest hurt. But the ache carried clarity. The family I longed for did not exist, and as I sank onto the couch again, staring into the shadows, I realized I had to decide whether I would keep begging for their approval or finally step out of their shadow. The ringing of my phone startled me awake the next morning. My eyes were swollen from little sleep. The light outside, still pale and gray. I reached across the nightstand and stared at the screen. Rachel's name flashed. The same picture she had taken at a summer barbecue. Smiling like she had never hurt anyone, my finger hovered over the decline button. But against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came sweet, almost syrupy. Claire. We were all emotional last night. Dad didn't mean to be so harsh. I know you are tired. But let's just talk this through. I have the paperwork ready. And if you sign today, we can move on. Imagine how relieved everyone will be. I swallowed, my throat dry. I stayed quiet long enough that she filled the silence with a laugh that had no warmth. If you keep resisting, you're only making it harder for yourself. I ended the call without a word. My hand shook as I set the phone down. And before I could catch my breath, it rang again. This time it was Dad. His voice was rough, still carrying the anger from the night before. You embarrass this family. Claire, Rachel is offering you an opportunity, and you are throwing it away. If you don't sign the documents, then you are finished with us. Don't ever step foot in this house again. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He continued, his tone sharper, cutting. We are giving you one last chance to do right by your sister. If you refuse, then you are on your own forever. The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone as if it might burst into flames. Their voices swirled in my head. Rachel's sugar-coated threats. My father's cold command. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. I moved to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. But my hand trembled so badly, the rim clinked against the counter. For a moment I thought of calling back, of apologizing, and of giving in, just to make the pounding in my chest stop. But then, I remembered my grandfather's shaky handwriting, the letter tucked in that cedar chest. He had trusted me. Not Rachel. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. Rachel, Dad is serious. Sign today, or we are done with you. Mijn legs felt weak. So I sat at the table and stared at the glowing screen. For years, I had bent to keep the peace. Swallowing insults. Sacrificing time. Sending Rachel money when she blew through her paycheck. Every time I told myself it was the last. Every time I went back when they called. But last night had cracked something inside me that could not be fixed. I pressed the record button on the voice memo app, the red light pulsing on my screen. If they were going to threaten me, I would not face it empty-handed. The phone rang again that evening. Rachel's voice poured through. Smoother this time. Claire, you're being dramatic. We are family. This isn't betrayal. It's about building a future together. If you don't trust me, then trust Dad. He knows what he's doing. I forced myself to keep my tone steady. Where are the contracts? Rachel, where is the company registered? Her pause lasted only a breath. But I caught it. You don't need to worry about details. It's all handled. Just sign, and you will see how quickly it grows. My chest tightened. I could almost see her smirk through the phone. The confidence that she had always been able to talk her way out of anything. I let the silence stretch. Then asked again, Who are the investors? What are the properties? Her voice sharpened. Stop playing smart. Just sign. Or Dad will make sure you regret it. I ended the call and saved the recording. My hands were still shaking. But a strange calm spread through me. For the first time in years, I had not backed down. The next morning at work, my eyes were heavy, but my focus sharpened as I pulled up spreadsheets. Numbers had always been my refuge. Logical and clean, unlike the chaos of my family. Still, the phone kept buzzing on my desk. Rachel and Dad taking turns like vultures circling. I muted it, watching the screen flash with each new attempt. At lunch, I stepped outside into the crisp air of downtown Columbus. Office workers hurried past with their sandwiches and coffee, their laughter echoing. I wondered if any of them had ever been forced to choose between their savings and their family's approval. My hands curled into fists. That evening, another call came. This time, both their voices on speaker. Rachel started soft. Dad cut in with threats. The two of them weaving a net around me. I pressed record again, letting their words burn into my phone's memory. Dad's voice was colder than ice. This is your last warning. Either you sign, or you are not our daughter anymore. I felt the sting of the words, but I kept my silence. When the call ended, I sat on the couch in the dark, the red light of the recording still glowing. My heart was racing, but my decision was clear. I would not give them the money. I would not bend again, and this time, I would have proof of what they were doing. I set the phone down beside me, the quiet of the room pressing close. My chest rose and fell, the echoes of their voices fading. For the first time, I did not feel like prey. I felt like someone who had finally decided to fight back. The next morning, the winter sun broke weakly through my blinds, painting pale streaks across the floor. My phone sat on the coffee table, a black rectangle filled with threats and demands I had saved. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up, scrolling through the names that felt more like enemies than family. Then another name caught my eye, one that sent a rush of relief through me. Ethan Ward. I had not spoken to him in months, maybe even a year, but his number was still there. We had met at Ohio State, cramming for finance exams in the library, trading coffee runs when the nights stretched too late. He was the only person back then who had believed I was more than numbers in a spreadsheet, who had encouraged me to speak up when professors dismissed me. Now, years later, he was a practicing civil lawyer in Columbus, known for digging into messy financial disputes. My thumb hesitated over the call button, fear whispering that I might be dragging someone else into the mess. But the fear of standing alone was worse. I pressed it. His voice was steady, warm, familiar. Claire. Wow. It has been a while. What's going on? He swallowed hard, pacing the length of my living room as the words tumbled out. My sister. My father. The inheritance. The fake investment. I told him about the glossy brochures, the late-night calls, the threats that had filled my voicemail. I told him about the recordings sitting in my phone like landmines waiting to go off. When I finally stopped, breathless, Ethan was silent for a moment. Then, his tone shifted, calm but firm. That is a scam. Claire. I can hear it in every detail. Shell companies. No paperwork. Promises of guaranteed returns. They are trying to trap you. I sank onto the couch, the weight of his words both heavy and oddly comforting. I knew it. I whispered. I knew it in my gut, but I needed someone else to say it. You were right to record everything, he continued. Keep doing that. Every call. Every threat. Save texts. Save emails if they send any. This is not just a family dispute anymore. It could be fraud. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. Fraut. To hear someone else name it out loud made it real, in a way my thoughts had not dared. I rubbed my temples, my voice breaking. Ethan. They are my parents. It is Rachel. I don't want to believe they would. I heard him sigh on the other end. Sometimes family crosses lines you never think they will. But Claire, listen to me. You are not crazy. And you are not alone. His certainty steadied me. A rope pulling me out of the pit I had been slipping into since Christmas night. Do you still have that letter from your grandfather? He asked. Yes. Hold on to it. That is proof of his intent. It shows he trusted you with this money. If they try to claim otherwise, that letter matters. I closed my eyes, remembering the fragile paper pressed against my chest the night before. He went on, his voice practical now, the voice of the lawyer he had become. I will start digging. I know people at the state business registry. If Rachel has filed anything, I will find it. If she is tied to shell companies, I will trace it. But you need to be ready. Claire, if they push harder, it might get ugly. Ugly. The word made my stomach twist. But I forced myself to nod, even though he could not see me. I am ready. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The kind that was not empty, but full of understanding. Then he chuckled softly. Like he used to, during those late-night study sessions. You always were tougher than anyone gave you credit for. I laughed too, though tears blurred my vision. You were the only one who ever thought so. That is not true, he said firmly. I saw it then. And I see it now. We talked a little longer, catching up in bits and pieces between the heaviness. He told me about his new office downtown. About cases he had taken that no one else wanted. I told him about my job at the healthcare company. The endless spreadsheets. The long nights. When I said my parents never asked about it, he did not sound surprised. Before we hung up, his voice grew serious again. I will call you in a few days with what I find. In the meantime, keep every message. Don't delete anything. And Claire, promise me, you will not meet them alone again. I promised. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the phone warm in my hand. The weight of isolation had lifted just enough to let me breathe. For the first time in days, I felt like I had an ally. I walked to the window, looking out at the snow still piled on the street. The city moved on outside. Cars humming. Children dragging sleds across icy sidewalks. My life had tilted in ways I never expected. But I was not standing on shifting ground anymore. I had something solid. Someone who believed me. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder, carefully transferring every voice memo and screenshot. File after file filled the screen. A digital record of every threat. Each one tightened the knot in my chest, but also sharpened my resolve. When I closed the laptop, I picked up my phone again, scrolling back through the texts from Rachel. Lines of false sweetness, sudden rage, endless demands. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I stopped. No, I would keep them all. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Ethan's words. Fraud. Shell companies. Tracing records. The world he described sounded cold and brutal. But it also sounded like justice. I drifted to sleep with the thought that maybe, finally, the truth could be pulled into the light. And in the dark of my room, I felt the faintest flicker of something I had not let myself feel since the night of Christmas dinner. Hope. The morning came with the shrill buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. I blinked at the screen, Rachel's name glowing in bold letters. For a few seconds I considered ignoring it, but something inside me told me to answer. My thumb swiped across the screen, and her voice filled the room. You are wasting Grandpa's legacy. Claire, that money could be doubling by now. But you have no idea how to invest. You are just letting it rot in some boring account. I sat up, my hair falling into my face, my stomach knotting. She spoke with the same false confidence I had heard since we were children, the tone that dared me to question her. Rachel, I said evenly. Grandpa trusted me with that money. I am not handing it over to you. She laughed. Sharp and cruel. Trusted you. He may have thought you were smart. But look at you now, clutching at numbers on a screen, doing nothing with it. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. My finger pressed the record button as quietly as I could. Her voice poured into the phone, every venomous word etched into memory. You hear me? Claire, if you do not sign, you will lose everything. She hung up before I could respond. The silence that followed rang in my ears louder than her threats. I held the phone to my chest, feeling my pulse pound beneath it. Later that afternoon, while I was at my desk reviewing a budget report, the phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity won. Elaine's voice came through soft and trembling, as if she had been crying. Claire. Honey, I know things got heated. Please, just think of your sister. Sign the papers and keep the family together. Your father is upset. Rachel is upset. And this is tearing us apart. Her words cut deeper than Rachel's threats. I wanted so badly to believe her voice carried love. But the undertone was clear. It was not a plea for me. It was pressure for Rachel. Mom, I said, do you hear yourself? You are asking me to give away my future, so Rachel can play with money she will never manage. Her sobs grew louder. If you cared about us, you would do it. Do it for peace. I closed my eyes, the pen in my hand pressing into the paper until the tip broke. Mom, peace does not come from lies. She whispered something I barely caught before hanging up. Then maybe you are not the daughter I thought you were. The call ended, and I sat frozen, staring at the wall. The voice memo app was still open from earlier, and I pressed play. Rachel's threat spilled out, each word sharp and undeniable. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. Hearing it again made my body shake. I curled my knees to my chest. The phone pressed against my ear. My heart thudded so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. But beneath the fear came something steadier. I saved the recording and labeled it. The file name glowed back at me like armor. Proof. That night, I paced the length of my apartment. The lights dimmed. The street outside quiet, under a blanket of snow. Every corner of my mind screamed for me to give in, to sign and end it. Yet each time, the sound of Rachel's voice on that recording reminded me why I could not. I remembered sitting in Grandpa's hospital room 2 years ago. The way his hand had felt frail but steady in mine. He had looked at me, his eyes clouded but sharp with meaning. Do not let anyone take what is yours. Claire, promiseme, I whispered now into the empty air. I promise. Grandpa. The phone lit up again with Rachel's name. Then Dad's. Then Mom's. One after the other. Like vultures circling, I let them ring. The recordings were all I needed. Hours later, I sat back down on the couch and pressed play again. Rachel's words filled the room, bitter and cold. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. My body trembled, but my jaw locked firm. The fear was still there, coiled tight in my chest. But alongside it grew a determination I had never felt before. I saved the file once more, copied it into the folder Ethan had told me to keep organized. I imagined handing it over in a courtroom one day, her voice echoing against the walls. undeniable. The night settled deep around me, heavy and quiet. I sat with the sound of my own breathing, the phone heavy in my palm. The threat replayed in my mind like a drumbeat, steady, relentless, but instead of breaking me, it steadied me. I would not bend. Not this time. 2 days later, my phone lit up with Ethan's name, and I answered before the first ring finished. His voice was lower than usual, the kind of tone he used when he had news I would not like. Claire. I've been digging. I checked the Ohio Business Registry, national databases, even the SEC. There is nothing. No company tied to Rachel. Nothing legitimate at all. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. Nothing. You mean she is bluffing? He exhaled slowly. Worse. I found traces of companies she tried to set up before. They pop up under different names. All dissolved within a year. Some were sued for misrepresentation. Others for failing to deliver returns. Each time the record just vanishes. Like someone paid to make it go away. The room seemed to tilt. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my free hand gripping the blanket. You are telling me this is not just a bad idea. It is a scam. Yes, a scam that has been run before. My breath came shallow. Ethan's voice steadied me as he continued. She is not acting alone either. A few of those companies list your father as a silent guarantor. The cases were closed quickly. Which means someone intervened. Likely your parents. The words cut deeper than I expected. I could accept Rachel scheming. Her history was full of it. But my parents attaching their names, shielding her when lawsuits came. That wound felt sharper than any threat. Ethan paused. Claire. I also spoke to someone from our college years. Remember Kevin from our finance class? I searched my memory and nodded faintly, even though Ethan could not see me. The one who tried to start a tech fund after graduation. That is him. He told me Rachel convinced him and 3 others to invest in a housing project outside Cleveland right after college. She promised quick returns. Talked about exclusive land rights. They lost tens of thousands. When they threatened legal action, your father stepped in. The case disappeared. I closed my eyes. The room spun. My sister had not just stumbled a few times. She had made a career out of lies. And my parents had covered it. Time after time. Feeding the illusion that she was golden. Why would they still choose her? I whispered. More to myself than to Ethan. Because denial is easier than admitting the truth. He answered softly. But you need to see it clearly. If you give her that money, it will vanish like all the rest. I thanked him, my voice barely steady, and promised to keep documenting everything. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, the weight of betrayal pressing so heavily that I struggled to breathe. I stood and walked into the living room. On the mantel above the couch sat a framed photograph of my grandfather. His white hair combed neatly. His eyes bright with the quiet humor he always carried. Next to it was the folded letter he had written me. The edges worn from my hands, tracing them too many times. I picked up the frame and held it close. His voice came back to me as clear as if he were in the room. Do not let anyone take what is yours. Claire. Not even family. Tears blurred the picture. I thought of all the nights he spent teaching me how to read ledgers. How he joked that numbers never lied, even when people did. He had seen something in me that my parents refused, too. That was why he had chosen me, not Rachel, to carry his legacy. And now the people who should have protected me were the ones trying hardest to strip it away. I lowered the frame back carefully, wiping at my face, and stood in the middle of the room. My chest hurt, but beneath the pain was a rising clarity. If I could not trust my parents, if I could not trust Rachel, then I had to trust myself. The buzz of another text broke the silence. Rachel's name glowed across the screen again. I did not open it right away. Just stared at it, the letters blurring until they meant nothing. When I finally tapped it, the words jumped out. Sign or you will regret it. Dad is losing patience. I saved the message, dragging it into the folder with the recordings and screenshots. Proof piled higher with every day. The evening stretched long. I made coffee, though it was already late. The bitter taste grounding me, sitting at the kitchen table. I spread the documents I had kept over the years. The letter from Grandpa. The bank statements showing the inheritance untouched. My own savings. Evidence of responsibility. Evidence that I had earned the trust Rachel never cared for. My phone buzzed again. This time I let it go to voicemail. When the recording dinged through, Rachel's voice filled my apartment once more. Claire, I am not playing anymore. If you don't sign, you will lose more than money. I pressed save. Another file added to the growing stack. When the house grew quiet again, I walked back to the mantel and touched the edge of my grandfather's photo. The glass was cold against my fingers. I whispered, I will not let them take it. Grandpa, I promise. And for the first time since Christmas night, the words felt like steel instead of fragile hope. The snow outside had thinned into icy slush by the weekend. The sky low and gray, as if the city itself carried the weight, pressing on my chest. I could not shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, my mother would listen if she were away from Dad's booming voice and Rachel's endless demands. I told myself she still loved me in some quiet corner of her heart. That was why I found myself driving toward her house in Westerville, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Her small brick home sat on a corner lot with the same maple tree I had climbed as a child, its bare branches reaching against the sky. The Christmas wreath still clung to the front door, drooping, its ribbon faded from weather. I sat at the curb for a long minute, the engine idling, watching the curtains shift as if she already knew I was there. Finally, I cut the engine, pulled my coat tighter, and walked up the steps. The door opened before I knocked a second time. My mother stood there, her face tired, her hair pulled back hastily. Claire, she said softly, surprise flashing in her eyes. Come in. Your father is out running errands. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old fabric. The same sofa we had as kids sagged in the middle. And on the mantel hung photos of Rachel in her graduation gown, her cheerleading uniform, even one from last summer smiling at some family barbecue. Not one photo of me as an adult. She motioned me to the kitchen, where the table was set with 2 mugs. She busied herself with the kettle, avoiding my gaze. When the tea was poured, I wrapped my hands around the cup, though I felt no warmth. I came to ask you something, I said quietly. Do you see what Rachel is doing? Do you see that she is trying to steal Grandpa's inheritance? Her hand froze mid-motion, a spoon clinking against the mug. Tears welled quickly in her eyes. I know Rachel is reckless. She has made mistakes. For a moment, relief surged through me. Finally, she understood. Then she added, but she needs help more than you. You are strong. Claire, you have a career, a home. You manage on your own. Rachel is fragile. She has always been. If you gave her this money, maybe she would finally get her life together. The hope collapsed inside me. I leaned forward, my voice breaking. Mom, do you hear what you are saying? You are asking me to give away my future to cover for her lies. Her tears slid down her cheeks, and she whispered, sometimes we sacrifice for family, even when it hurts. I shook my head, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the ticking of the clock on the wall. What about me? Have you ever thought that I need you? that maybe I am the one hurting. Her shoulders hunched, and she pressed the tissue to her face. She could not meet my eyes. The silence stretched, filling the kitchen like smoke, until I felt I could not breathe. I thought of the nights I had spent studying while she braided Rachel's hair for dances, the birthdays she had forgotten, the way she had called me practical while calling Rachel brilliant, and now, even with the truth staring her in the face, she still chose my sister. The chair scraped against the floor as I stood, the sound sharp in the small room. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to hold my head high. I wanted her to stop me, to say something, anything that would prove she had not given up on me completely. But she only bowed her head lower, sobbing quietly into the tissue. I walked to the front door, each step heavier than the last. Memories crowded in with every glance at the walls. Rachel's trophies lined on a shelf. School portraits where my face had been pushed to the side of the frame. Holiday cards taped neatly, all featuring Rachel in the center. On the porch, the cold air rushed into my lungs like ice. I gripped the railing, staring at the cracked sidewalk below. My body felt hollow, as if some last piece of me had been carved away in that kitchen. I climbed into my car, the leather seat stiff from the cold, and sat gripping the steering wheel. Through the windshield I could still see her silhouette in the kitchen window, head bent, shoulders shaking. She had cried, but not for me. She had cried for Rachel. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, my breath fogging the glass. I had wanted so badly to believe she might take my side, but all she had done was remind me of my place. The expendable daughter, the one who was always asked to give more because I had less value to them. Cars passed on the street, their tires hissing against the wet pavement, reminding me that the world moved on even when mine felt like it had collapsed. I straightened, wiping at my face with the sleeve of my coat. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it also carved out clarity. If my mother could not choose me when the truth was plain, then she never would. I started the engine, the car vibrating beneath me. As I pulled away, the house shrank in my rearview mirror. I did not look back again. The drive home blurred past in streaks of gray sky and icy roads. My hands clenched tight around the wheel. Meaflocht. The silence in the car was suffocating. But in that silence I heard the echo of my own question, repeating again and again. Have you ever thought I needed you? And her silence answering louder than words. When I reached my apartment, I climbed the stairs slowly, exhaustion dragging at every step. Inside, I shut the door and leaned against it, the quiet pressing close. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the empty room, my chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. That visit had been my last attempt to salvage something with her. Now I knew there was nothing left to salvage. I walked to the mantel where my grandfather's picture sat and touched the frame with shaking fingers. The steel that had begun to grow inside me after Ethan's call hardened further. I could not count on my family to protect me. I had to protect myself. And as I stood there in the dim light of my apartment, I accepted the truth fully. I was on my own. The knock came just after noon on a Sunday. Sharp and impatient, echoing through my small apartment. My stomach clenched before I even reached the door. Through the peephole, I saw my father's broad shoulders and Rachel's polished smile. The kind she wore when she thought she was in control. A thick folder rested in her arms. I took a breath, slid my phone into the pocket of my cardigan, and pressed record. The red light glowed faintly, hidden beneath the fabric. Then I opened the door. "Claire," Dad said, his tone clipped and commanding. "We are not here to argue. We are here to settle this." Rachel pushed past him, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and set the folder on my kitchen table as if she owned the place. The smell of her perfume spread quickly, sweet and cloying. She flipped the folder open, her voice smooth. These are the documents for the Family Investment Fund. All you need to do is sign, and we can move forward. I stayed near the doorway, my arms folded across my chest. Let me see them. Rachel's smile faltered just a little, but she slid the papers across the table toward me. I pulled out a chair slowly, my hands steady, even though my pulse hammered in my ears. Page after page carried my name. Legal jargon wrapped around numbers that meant nothing. Clauses that handed over complete control. And then my breath caught. There it was. A signature at the bottom of one page. My name. Looped and perfect. But not mine. My eyes lingered on the forged letters. The ink pressed with false certainty. I lifted the paper slowly and looked at Rachel. Why does this already have my signature? Her cheeks flushed. But she forced a laugh. Oh, that was just to prepare the file. The lawyer must have mixed something up. It is nothing. Dad stepped closer, his hand heavy on the back of the chair. Stop stalling. Claire, sign the rest. I set the paper down carefully, my fingers brushing over the forged signature. The weight of the moment pressed hard against my chest, but my voice came out steady and cold. If this fund is real, why did you have to fake my name? The room went still. Rachel's mouth opened, then shut again. Dad's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the chair. You are being dramatic, he snapped. It is a clerical mistake. Just sign. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. I want to hear Rachel explain it. Her eyes flicked to Dad, searching for direction. Then she forced another smile. Mistakes happen. Claire, what matters is that we are offering you a chance to be part of something bigger. I studied her face, the way her lips twitched, the sweat beginning to bead near her temple. My phone in my pocket caught every word. You forged my signature, I said again, slower this time. That is not a mistake. Rachel's voice sharpened. If you do not sign, you will regret it. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the folder jump. Enough. You are not walking away from this. The sound jolted through me, but I did not flinch. Instead, I pointed to the signature on the page, my finger pressing against the lie in black ink. If this is so legitimate, why does it need a forgery to exist? The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream. Rachel's face twisted, caught between fury and fear, while my father's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. I gathered the papers into a neat pile and slid them back across the table. My voice was calm, almost quiet. I am not signing. Rachel's chair screeched against the floor as she stood abruptly, her eyes burning. You think you are better than us? That money will disappear one way or another. Dad's hand clenched into a fist on the table. This is your last chance. Claire, I rose slowly, keeping my phone steady in my pocket. The recording still running. My heart pounded, but a strange calm wrapped around me. They had shown me exactly who they were. I looked from Rachel to Dad, the silence stretching until it cut the air in two. Then I spoke, each word deliberate. You cannot steal what was never yours. The color drained from Rachel's face. Dad's glare deepened, but neither of them moved. I turned away from the table, my footsteps firm against the hardwood, leaving their folder and their lies behind. My father's fist slammed against the table, so hard the plates rattled, his face red and twisted with rage. You are an ungrateful daughter, Claire. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us. Rachel shot up from her chair, her voice rising to a shrill scream that pierced the air. You are destroying this family. Do you even realize what you are doing? You are tearing us apart. I stood in the doorway, my hand pressed to my pocket where the phone kept recording. Their voices filled the room, echoing with a venom that no longer surprised me. My breath was steady now, not trembling the way it had days ago. I pulled the phone from my pocket, unlocked it with one swipe, and pressed the green button. The operator's voice answered clearly. 911. What is your emergency? My voice rang out strong enough to cut through the chaos. This is Claire Morgan. My family is trying to force me to sign forged documents to steal my inheritance. They brought paperwork with a fake signature already on it. They are threatening me. Rachel's face drained of color before twisting again. Her shriek even louder. What are you doing? Hang up. This is family. Dad lunged forward, his hand reaching for my phone. But I stepped back quickly, holding it high. Do not touch me. I warned, my voice sharper than I had ever heard it. The operator's tone was firm. Officers are on the way. Stay where you are. I repeated the address clearly, my eyes never leaving my father's glare. Rachel paced behind him, her hands waving wildly, her voice a mixture of anger and panic. You cannot call the cops on us. Claire. This is private. We are your family. I kept the line open, the recording and the call capturing every word. Within minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the quiet street outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the window, scattering across the walls of my apartment. 2 officers entered after a knock, their presence filling the room with authority. One was tall with dark hair, his badge reading Miller. The other, Officer Davis, was steady-eyed, scanning the table where the folder still lay open. What is going on here? Officer Miller asked, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. I stepped forward, holding out the folder. They brought forged documents into my apartment and demanded I sign them. My name is already on some pages in handwriting that is not mine. I have recordings of their threats. Dad's face twisted, his tone suddenly smoother. Practiced. This is a misunderstanding. We were discussing family finances. That is all. Officer Davis flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowing at the neat false signature. This is clearly not a misunderstanding. Sir, Rachel darted forward, her voice shaking but shrill. It is family. Family issues. She is exaggerating. Officer Miller shook his head, his tone flat and unyielding. Forged signatures are never just family issues. Rachel froze, her mouth snapping shut, her eyes darting between the officers and me. My father's jaw clenched, but even he said nothing. I pulled out my phone and opened the recordings, pressing play, so the room filled with Rachel's earlier words. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. The sound hung heavy in the air. Rachel's face flushed deep crimson, her hand twitching as if she wanted to grab the phone from me. But Officer Davis stepped between us, her palm raised. That is enough. Officer Miller gathered the papers, sliding them carefully into an evidence bag. We will be taking these with us. Miss Morgan, we will also need copies of those recordings for the report. I nodded, my chest rising and falling with relief, so sharp it almost hurt. Rachel let out a desperate cry. You cannot do this. This is our family. You are ruining everything. Officer Davis turned to her, her voice sharp. Your family ties do not excuse fraud. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Dad looked down at the floor, his fists clenched. Rachel trembled, her chest heaving with anger, but she no longer had words to fight with. The officers asked a few more questions, their pens scratching steadily against their notepads as I recounted the events, each word firm, each detail precise. When they finally gathered their things and prepared to leave, Officer Miller looked at me with a steady gaze. You did the right thing by calling. I stood in the doorway as they stepped back into the cold, their patrol car lights casting long streaks across the snow. Rachel stood frozen in my kitchen, her fists balled, her face blotched with fury. Dad brushed past me, his shoulders stiff, his silence louder than any insult. The door shut behind them, and I leaned against it, the weight of what had just happened pressing into me. The folder was gone, the recordings saved, the truth finally acknowledged by someone other than me. My apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not suffocating, not heavy with doubt. It was steady, almost solid, as if for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without fear. The courthouse in downtown Toledo smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. The echo of footsteps bouncing off marble floors as I walked down the long hallway. My palms were damp despite the cold January air that had clung to me on the way in. I carried nothing but myself, yet it felt as though I bore the weight of generations. Inside the courtroom, I sat at the front, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The jury filed in, their faces solemn. Strangers who would soon hear the most painful chapters of my life laid bare. Across the aisle, Rachel sat beside her attorney in a fitted black suit, her hair pulled into a neat bun. Though her eyes darted nervously, my father's shoulders were rigid. His jaw clenched as he whispered to his lawyer. My mother sat quietly, her face pale, her hands twisting a tissue until it nearly tore. Ethan leaned close to me, his voice calm but steady. Remember, Claire, the truth is on your side. Speak clearly. Answer directly. And let the evidence speak louder than anything else. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Judge Parker was a tall woman, with silver hair pulled into a tight knot. Her presence commanding without needing to raise her voice. She looked over the courtroom with eyes that seemed to see through excuses. The case began with the prosecution. Ellen Brooks, a sharp attorney with a voice that cut like glass, laid out the allegations. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft of inheritance. Her words fell like stones in the quiet room. Then my name was called. My legs trembled as I stood. But when I took the oath and sat in the witness chair, something steadied inside me. I kept my eyes forward, my voice firm. On December 25th, I said, my father and sister confronted me at a family dinner. They demanded I transfer my inheritance of $850,000 into a supposed investment fund. When I refused, they escalated, visiting my apartment days later with documents that already contained my forged signature. Gasps rippled through the room. I continued, recounting each moment, each call. When Ellen asked if I had proof, I nodded and handed over my phone. The recordings played through the speakers. Rachel's voice sharp and undeniable. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. I dared a glance at the jury. Their faces were still, some frowning, some shaking their heads slightly. Next, Ethan took the stand. He laid out the paper trail he had uncovered. Company filings that appeared and dissolved. Lawsuits that vanished too quickly. Rachel's name threaded through it all. He spoke methodically, the calm confidence of a man who had studied every corner of their scheme. Rachel Slavier objected, tried to twist his words, but each document entered into evidence was a nail in the coffin. When Rachel was called to testify, she lifted her chin high. She claimed she had only been trying to help me grow my inheritance. Her voice trembled just enough to sound like a performance. She denied forging anything, blamed clerical errors, and insisted it was all a misunderstanding. Ellen stepped forward, her tone like ice. Then how do you explain this recording? Miss Morgan. Rachel's words filled the room again. Her threat clear. Undeniable. If you do not sign, you will lose everything. Her face drained of color. For the first time, her confidence cracked. My father was called next. He tried to portray himself as a protective parent, misled by Rachel's enthusiasm. His voice was deep, measured. But the evidence of his signature on earlier shell company filings made his defense crumble. Finally, my mother was asked to speak. She admitted she had known Rachel's plan was risky, that she had begged me to sign anyway for the sake of peace. Her voice shook as she confessed, tears dripping onto the wood of the witness stand. She said she had felt trapped, caught between her daughters. But her excuses sounded thin, even to my own ears. The trial stretched for days, each one heavy with tension. When the final arguments were made, I sat gripping the edge of the bench, my breath shallow. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like years. When they returned, the room grew so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Judge Parker read the verdicts clearly, her voice unwavering. Rachel Morgan, guilty of fraud and forgery. Rachel gasped, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Her attorney whispered urgently, but she shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thomas Morgan, guilty of aiding and abetting fraud. Fined $100,000. My father's face hardened. His jaw set, but he lowered his eyes, his broad shoulders slumping for the first time I could remember. Elaine Morgan, guilty of willful complicity. Sentenced to 2 years probation and community service. My mother sobbed openly, her tissue tearing in her hands, her entire body shaking as if the weight of her choices finally pressed in on her. Judge Parker's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sentences, delivered. I sat frozen, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the tears slipping silently down my face. Not from grief, but from something stronger, something sharper. Pride. I had stood in the storm and spoken the truth. I lifted my chin, meeting Rachel's tear-streaked glare, my father's bowed head, my mother's trembling frame. The weight of their betrayal would never vanish, but neither would the strength I had found in fighting back. And as the courtroom emptied around me, I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the sound of the gavel echo in my chest, steady and final. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the cold air wrapped around me, biting through my coat. But it felt different than before. The weight I carried for months had lifted, and though my heart still ached, my steps were steady. Reporters called my name. Voices rose with questions. But I kept walking, ignoring the flashes of cameras. My silence was answer enough. That night I sat in my apartment with the lights dimmed, staring at my phone as it buzzed again and again. My mother's number. My father's number. Even an unknown line I knew must be Rachel's attorney. I turned it face down on the counter and let it ring. I blocked them all the next morning. Days stretched into weeks. And for the first time in years, I tasted quiet that was not suffocating. I went to work. I walked through the streets of Columbus in the evenings. I cooked dinner without bracing for the phone to explode with demands. Still, a loneliness clung to me like a shadow. One Saturday in February, a knock came at my door. My chest tightened. But when I opened it, I found my cousin Martha smiling, her dark hair tucked under a wool hat. She lived in Cleveland, an hour away. But she stepped into my apartment as if she had always belonged there. "I heard what happened," she said gently, setting down a small box of pastries she had brought. "I wanted to see you." Her hug was warm, grounding, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was not standing alone on a cliff. We spent the afternoon sipping coffee, the box of pastries disappearing slowly as she listened more than she spoke. When I told her everything, her eyes flashed with anger, then softened with compassion. "Claire, you did the right thing. You protected yourself and Grandpa's trust. He would be proud." Her words cracked something in me, and I cried until my throat was raw. She stayed, rubbing my shoulder, never rushing me. In the weeks that followed, she visited often, sometimes dragging me up to Cleveland for dinner with her friends. She reminded me that family could mean more than blood, that it could be chosen. I also began searching for pieces of myself outside of work. I joined a book club at the public library, the kind where retirees and college students sat side by side dissecting novels. The first night I spoke only once, my voice quiet, but the woman beside me squeezed my hand as if to say, "Welcome." On Thursdays, I took a pottery class at the community center. My first bowl collapsed under my fingers, lopsided and ugly. But I laughed, the sound surprising even me. The clay on my hands felt grounding, pulling me back into a world where creation was possible. Not just survival, but my past was never far. One afternoon in early March, I returned home to find a letter slipped under my door, my name written in my mother's careful script. My hands shook as I tore it open. "Claire," it began. "We want peace. We want our family together again. This fight has gone on too long. Let us start over." The words blurred as I read on. Nowhere did it say we were wrong. Nowhere did it say we are sorry. It was only peace on their terms. Silence instead of accountability. I crumpled the letter in my fist, my chest burning, then walked it straight to the fireplace. I struck a match, watched the flames curl the edges, blackening each word until nothing was left but ash. The smoke rose, and with it went the last fragile hope I had clung to. That night I dreamed of my grandfather again, his hand warm over mine as he told me not to let anyone take what was mine. I woke with the echo of his voice, still steady in my chest. The following week, Martha came with me to the Humane Society. I had thought about it for months, but only now felt ready. We walked past rows of kennels, barking and whimpering, tails wagging hopefully. And then I saw him, a scruffy terrier mix with ears too big for his head and eyes that held both fear and resilience. The volunteer told me his name was Rusty. He had been abandoned but still wagged his tail at strangers. When I knelt by the gate, his nose pressed against my fingers, and I felt something inside me shift. I filled out the paperwork, my signature, steady as I signed, page after page. When the last form was complete, the volunteer smiled and handed me the leash. "Congratulations! He is yours now." Rusty trotted beside me as we left, his nails clicking on the tile floor, his tail wagging. Outside the air was still cold. "Butibore färdigt." Holding that leash, I realized I had taken another step into a life that belonged only to me. That evening he curled at my feet on the couch, snoring softly. While I read a book from the club, I reached down to scratch behind his ears, my chest swelling with something I had not felt in years. A beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long stripes across my living room floor. Rusty stretched at my feet, yawning, before hopping up to nudge my hand with his cold nose. His presence filled the apartment with a kind of comfort I had not known in years. As I poured his food into the bowl, I caught myself smiling. This tiny creature trusted me completely, without conditions. And in that trust, I felt something I had searched for my whole life. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a rhythm that was finally mine. I woke early, brewed coffee, and walked Rusty through the quiet streets of Columbus while the sun was still low. Neighbors waved as we passed, some stopping to scratch his head. And for the first time, I did not shrink from small talk. I went to work, returned home to cook simple meals, and spent evenings with books or at the pottery wheel. The sharp edges of the past still pricked at me, but they no longer cut deep. One evening in March, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop. I had been thinking for days about what to do with a portion of the inheritance. Holding on to all of it felt heavy, almost tainted by the fight it had taken to protect it. Then I remembered the Ohio Fraud Victims Network, a nonprofit I had read about during Ethan's research. My cursor hovered over their website until I finally filled in the form, authorizing a donation of $200,000. My hands shook as I typed the number. But when the confirmation message appeared, relief washed over me. 2 days later, the director called personally. Her voice trembled as she thanked me. "With this," she said, "we will expand our legal aid program and help hundreds of people who cannot afford to fight back." I gripped the phone tight, my throat thick. "Please use it well," I whispered. They invited me to speak at a workshop, standing before a group of strangers. I shared what had happened in my family. Faces turned toward me, eyes wide, some wet with tears. I told them about the phone calls, the fake documents, the forged signature. I told them how I had felt like a child again, begging for love that never came. And then I told them about fighting back, about calling 911, about walking into court with my head high. When I finished, silence hung heavy. Then applause broke out. A woman in the front row came up afterward, clutching my hands. "I thought I was alone," she whispered, "but you proved we can fight." Driving home that night, Rusty's head sticking out the window beside me, I felt lighter than I had in years. Meanwhile, the consequences of the trial unfolded quietly across Ohio. Rachel was serving her sentence in the Women's Correctional Facility outside Marysville. News traveled fast, and her name, once tossed around with admiration in our family, now carried shame. Dad had been forced to sell assets to pay fines, his once untouchable reputation in shambles. Mom could be seen along the highways of Franklin County in an orange vest, picking up trash with other probation workers. They had all paid a price. And for once, I was not the one carrying the burden, but they had not disappeared from my life entirely. In early April, another letter arrived at my apartment. The envelope carried my mother's handwriting, neat and careful. Inside, the words spilled across the page, asking for peace, for reconciliation, for a family dinner when everything had cooled down. Yet not a single line admitted wrong. Not a single word carried apology. I read it twice, my stomach twisting, then carried it to the fireplace. The match caught quickly, the paper curling into blackened ash. I watched the smoke rise, carrying with it the last of my hope that they might one day see me clearly. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. Rusty wagged his tail, as if he knew something had shifted. By May, the days had grown warm, and Martha visited from Cleveland more often. We went to the farmer's market downtown, strolled through rows of fresh produce and flowers, and laughed about things that had nothing to do with betrayal or courtrooms. One afternoon, she watched Rusty chase a ball across the park and turned to me. "You built a life from ashes, Claire. That is something to be proud of." Her words sank deep. I realized then that family did not always come from blood. Sometimes it came from those who chose to stand beside you, who reminded you that you were worth more than the lies you had been told. In June, the Fraud Victims Network held a larger conference, and I was asked to give the keynote talk. Standing behind the podium, I looked out at hundreds of faces and spoke with the strength I had earned. I told them, betrayal does not define you. That survival is not weakness, but proof of resilience. The applause echoed long after I stepped down, and I knew my story had a purpose beyond myself. Life moved forward, in ways both simple and profound. I shaped clay bowls that wobbled but made me laugh. I underlined passages in books I loved, discussing them with friends at the library. I let Rusty curl against me on the couch, his steady breathing reminding me that peace could be found in the smallest moments. One Sunday afternoon, I took Rusty to Schiller Park. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, the trees heavy with leaves, sunlight slipping through in warm patterns. Families picnicked, children chased kites, and Rusty tugged at his leash until I let him bound across the lawn. I sat on a bench watching him, my heart swelling with a fullness I had not felt since childhood. The world was not perfect, and scars remained, but I had something stronger than the pain. I had freedom. I had strength. I had the life my grandfather believed I could build. As the sun dipped lower, casting the park in golden light, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, I was not looking back. I was looking forward. If it were you, would you forgive the family who betrayed you? Share your thoughts. And do not forget to support this channel to hear more stories of justice and resilience.